Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wall Street for Main Street podcast. My name is Mo Dawoud, and alongside John Manfreda, and today's special guest, the returning guest, is Jim Rogers, the author of Street Smart, Adventures on the Road and in the Market. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Well, John, Mo, I'm delighted to be here. It's nice to hear you again.
Thank you. And my first question I wanted to ask you was actually about a new law. I actually just read about it, and I wanted to know your thoughts and what you think would happen. Is Australia proposed a large fines for foreigners buying property? They're worried about too much fight capital pushing up real estate in Australia. I just want to know what your thoughts are, and if that passed, what effect it would have on Australia's market.
Well, history has shown many times that when you start closing off markets, in the end, it's bad for everybody concerned, and this will be the same thing. It's a little bit absurd. People who own houses should be delighted to see the prices going up. It increases their net worth, etc. But they don't usually complain. You get the people complaining who are the ones who are trying to buy a house, and they complain. Parliamentarians, legislators, congressmen, whatever the country it happens to be, listen to those people who come down and knock on their door. And the next thing you know, you have another piece of absurd legislation like this one. Eventually, they'll realize that this has been bad for the country and they'll change it. But in the meantime, a lot of people will suffer and a lot of malinvestment will be made.
And that's one of the things the government is good at, making malinvestment in the economy, especially the U.S. government as well. So I want to talk about your book. You made a couple of predictions in your book that actually became true, and one of them is your prediction on the Swiss franc. Now, you predicted that the Swiss franc would start increasing in value sooner rather than later. And so far in 2010, the currency had done very well so far. What did you see that made you make that prediction in your book while the Swiss was pegged to the euro, and now it's not?
Well, it was pretty clear that when you do anything artificial in a market, especially if you try to set an artificial value, eventually it's going to break free. I mean, it's happened throughout history. You don't have to be I'm not very smart, but I can read history, and I know what has always happened in the past. And it had to happen. It's like a longer ago example would be the price of gold. You guys may not remember, but once upon a time, the price of gold was dictated by governments to be $35 an ounce. It was an absurd price, but they held it there, and then finally when it broke free, it went up 47 times, whatever the number was. It went up 40 or 50 times. The same with silver. They dictated it had to be $1.29 an ounce. Well, eventually it broke free, and silver went from $1.29 to $50 an ounce. Sure, you can artificially set prices, or artificially set anything you want, but it's not going to last. Because when a reality eventually takes hold, and unfortunately, when reality does eventually takes hold, there's usually a big move because things have been artificially depressed for so long.
Yeah, that's a great point. Price controls, whether it's currency or what the U.S. did in the 70s with oil, they just don't work. You got to let markets work. One other thing in your book that you talked about was North Korea's embracement, or will start embracing capitalism, and you've talked about a North Korea-South Korea merger. I was wondering what you see, how you saw what you see, and what made you come to that conclusion.
Well, the kid who's running North Korea now, he's only been there 3 years. I'm not talking about the grandfather or the father, who were pretty absurd guys, but the kid has been there 3 years. The kid was raised in Switzerland. He knows there's a different world out there. He knows that all that stuff that happened for the last 60 or 70 years has not worked and has not been good for North Korea. More important, his generals, when they were captains and lieutenants, they would go to Moscow or Beijing, wherever. They couldn't go many places. But now they go back to Moscow and Beijing, and they say, oh, my gosh, look what's happened here. And then they go home, and they see that nothing has happened at home in North Korea. So there's not really many people against opening up and change. There's now a middle class. There's now a black market throughout the country because and you can get DVDs. There are mobile phones now. There's the internet now. Not everywhere, but it's just starting. So people know that there's a different world, and they want to have it, just like everybody else. Again, you can suppress reality for a long time, but once it starts opening up, as with the price of oil or the price of gold, which we discussed before, something's going to give. Well, what's going to give is North Korean society. There are now 13 free trade zones in North Korea. I mean, all this is just happening now. This is not something someday or last year. This is just happening as we speak. You know, you can go there. They have international marathons. They have international wrestling contests. You can take a bicycle tour of North Korea now, tours. You can go on art tours. I mean, if the grandfather were alive, I'm sure he would shoot the kid. Right? If his father were alive, he'd probably hang the kid. But it's all opening. It's changing. And I don't know many people who are against it. Japan's against it because they will not be able to compete with a united Korea. America's against it because they want to be able to keep troops in Korea. They like having 30,000 troops on near the Chinese border. But nobody else is against it.
And that's a great point. And you actually went to North Korea, and you and your wife went there. What was your conclusion on going to that country? Was it better than you expected, or was it worse than what you thought it was going to be?
Well, I've been there twice. My wife and I went when their father was still alive, and it was pretty. It was. It was restricted. We were very restricted with that for 4 days, but we were more restricted than we've been in many countries where we visited. I went again last fall. And the kid had been in power for 2.5 years. And it's very, very different from what I saw the first time. Now there are markets everywhere, open markets, free markets. You know, I could wander around the streets. I could talk to people. I could see things. These things, I did some of that on the first trip, but the second trip it was much, much more open. When I crossed the border into North Korea, there were hundreds, or I should say thousands, of Chinese coming across the border because everybody's pouring in there. Everybody except Americans, you know. We're citizens of the land of the free, so we're not very free to do much of anything. But the Chinese are pouring in there. The Russians are pouring in there. The immigration post and the bridge were brand new. They just opened, but they're already inadequate, so they started building a new bridge and a new immigration post because so many people are pouring in there to take advantage of the changes that are taking place.
And that's very interesting. I didn't realize that things in North Korea was improving because I only see what I see in the news and the media, and nothing good comes out of that country. So that's an interesting perspective there.
Well, we fortunately or unfortunately, as I say, are citizens of the land of the free, and American propaganda is pretty all-pervasive, and unfortunately, we don't get reality. Like when China opened up, you know, America was one of the last countries to know. Look at Myanmar. America was one of the last countries to remove the sanctions on Myanmar. Everybody else was pouring in there. Cuba to this day, you know, finally America started catching on. Oh, things are changing in Cuba and starting to wake up. But everybody else has already figured that out and has been pouring in there for years. The Cubans love it. Well, I should say that the Spanish and the Mexicans love it. You know, oh, here come the Americans. Now we can sell to the Americans as they're pouring in here.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a great point from what I grasped of what you said is you talked about all these countries trading with North Korea, and the best way it seems like for countries to get along is to open up and trade with each other. And one other thing I just wanted to ask is you brought up Cuba, and there's talks right now between America and Cuba opening up trade. What are your views of those talks, and what are you hearing? What do people in Asia think about those?
Well, I assure you, the best way, as you point out, the best way to improve relations is to let people trade with each other. People making money are usually pretty happy, certainly satisfied, and not sitting around trying to shoot each other. If they're making money with each other, you know, 20-year-old boys and girls don't want to shoot and fight kill each other. They want to go drinking and dancing together, and if they can do it, it's more likely to be peaceful and prosperous. when that happens. Most Asians don't think too much about Cuba at all. Cuba's only got 900 million people, and it's far, far away from here. But yes, the Chinese have been trading there for a long time, and they like to see it become more prosperous. Everybody does. If you send the New York Yankees down there to play some games with the Cuban baseball teams, I assure you that would do more for prosperity and peace than just about anything you can. Blockades don't help. They may help some politicians and some bureaucrats, but they don't help most people.
And that's a great point. Now, I want to shift gears here and talk about the current events going on in the U.S. economy. I don't know if you saw the recent testimony from Janet Yellen to Congress a couple of days ago, but looked like they're flip-flopping on the idea of raising the rate. Do you believe they will raise the rate this year? And if they do, what impact will it have on the economy?
Well, what will happen is eventually the market will raise rates and the Fed will follow. Everybody pays attention to the Fed, but it's really the market. Historically, the Fed has followed the market more than vice versa. Market rates, some rates are starting to go up, long rates anyway, in the U.S. What I suspect will happen is that somewhere along the line, rates will go up in 2015 for whatever reason. The markets will get scared. The markets will go down. Once they go down enough, whether it's the first rate increase or the second, then Yellen will panic. I mean, these guys are bureaucrats and academics. They don't know anything about how the world works. So Yellen will panic and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, guys," and she'll say, "We will help. Don't worry, we will save you." And then the markets will heave a sigh of relief, will rally. People will say, "Oh my gosh, we don't have to worry about anything," and we might even have a bubble at that point. And then when everybody's totally complacent and Mrs. Yellen thinks she saved the day, then we'll have the big collapse. That could be next year. It could be. I don't know. My market timing is always bad, but it's certainly going to happen in the next couple of years because the next time we have a market problem or an economic problem, it'll be much worse than last time because the debt has gone up by staggering amounts all over the world. A lot of people have talked about austerity and cutting back, but every country in the world now has much, much, much higher debt than it did in 2008 or even 2015 or 14, 15. So debts are going higher. The next time we have a problem, it's going to be worse than before.
I was just wondering, do you think, you just said you talked about raising rates. Do you think the Fed is going to willingly raise rates, or is it just going to be forced upon them through the market?
I suspect they will, quote, willingly do so, but that's because the market will be going up. I don't expect the market rates to double or triple all of a sudden overnight. The Fed suddenly say, "Oh, gosh, we got to do something." It's usually more gradual than that.
So let's talk about the stock market, which for the most part is overvalued. And a lot of investors out there who are struggling to get yield with the bond market the way it is and also with inflation, not much return in the bond market as well. So how does an investor on Main Street make a profit or get a positive return when the market is being artificially propped up by the central banks?
I don't know that the U.S. market is overvalued, as you put it. It's certainly very expensive. The thing about markets, they can go from overvalued and expensive to bubbles and to crazy valuations. It's happened many, many times in history. But it certainly is very high and very expensive. I'm not buying U.S. stocks because of that. I prefer to buy markets that are still depressed, and there are enough of them, I hope, where I can make money. But you're right. Many people have serious problems now. I mean, these policies by the Federal Reserve and other central banks are absolutely ruining a lot of people. Most of the people throughout history who have saved and invested for the future have been rewarded and have done okay. Unfortunately, the current policies are destroying those people, the people who save and invest for the future. They're being wiped out because the interest rates are nothing, and they're being wiped out at the expense of people who did it the wrong way. People who went and borrowed lots of money and built 5 or 6 houses with no job and no down payment. Those people are being rewarded at the expense of people who save and invest. So it's just another reason that when this collapses, it's going to be much, much worse. Countries which destroy their middle class or their saving class always, in the end, have huge social problems, economic problems, political problems, and we will too.
Yeah, you talked about cheap markets right now. Talked about the U.S. being overvalued. I definitely see that the bad behavior is being rewarded. What markets would you say? I see some emerging markets as cheap. What markets, in your view, are cheap? Do you have any in particular, or?
Well, I don't work as hard as this as I used to, but I bought Japanese shares this week. I bought Russian shares last week or two. Chinese shares I didn't buy, but I've got some Chinese shares I want to buy. Chinese market is down over 50% from its all-time high. The Japanese market is down over 50% from its all-time high. Russia is the most hated market in the world these days. So these are not. They may be too high priced, but they're certainly not too high priced on a historic basis. Whereas the U.S. is making all-time highs, and there's some emerging markets which are probably cheap too.
Now, you talk about the agricultural sector a lot, and one of the great things that's been happening in this country is, I think, is the demand for organic food is increasing. I mean, I go to Walmart now, and I see them selling organic food now. There's a lot of organic restaurants popping up around the country as well. Has your investment approach in the agricultural sector changed to take advantage of this increasing demand for organic food?
Well, I'm certainly optimistic about agriculture, as you insightfully point out, and I certainly see what's happening with organic. My wife buys organic food all the time, so it's not just other people. I see it in my own kitchen and my own dining room, and it is happening everywhere. Rightly or wrongly, it doesn't matter whether it's a fad or false. People are doing it, and so therefore there's a big market which continues to grow. Yes, there are great opportunities. I'm not an organic farmer. I'm not any kind of farmer, but for the people who know what they're doing, there's going to be a lot of money made.
And there's a very tight supply for organic beef due to the drought that we have in this country. And companies like Chipotle are having to go outside the country to import organic beef, or they start selling conventional beef as well. So I think one of the biggest market is organic beef right now.
Maybe what you should do is hang up the phone and go and open yourself a farm. Become a cowboy.
Not a bad idea.
You know how to ride a horse. You know how to ride a horse, and maybe you can be a cowboy.
But maybe that's the first step for me. I never rode a horse, but maybe I should start riding a horse.
Yeah. Well, I know of a horse stable, so maybe I can go around there and pick out a horse. Yeah.
So take a few lessons. If you fall off, you probably shouldn't be a cowboy. But if you're good, maybe you have a new career.
Yeah, good point. So, well, one topic I actually wanted to get your view on too was why do you think the oil prices around June it was in $94 per barrel, and now it's roughly in the 40s, late 40s. I don't know the exact number, but say $48 or $49. Why did it go down so quick, in your opinion?
Well, the main reason is, I'm glad you pointed out the dates. America was negotiating with Iran last summer. The deadline came in July, and the negotiations broke down. So both sides agreed to extend the negotiations for a year. Well, it was at that point that America went to Saudi Arabia and said, dump oil. We got to bring the Iranians around. Also, the U.S. was negotiating with Russia, too. So they said to Saudi Arabia, you dump oil, drive down the price of oil. Russia will be more compliant. Iran will be more compliant. And lo and behold, shortly thereafter, the price of oil started going down, and eventually, as most markets do, they go down slowly for a while, and eventually they start plunging for whatever reason. So it's geopolitical. Saudi Arabia was very happy to do it because of all the oil, the frackers. You know, they wanted to do something to slow the frackers. They cannot stop the frackers, but they can at least slow it down. The new production of oil. You know, if you look at the world situation, the world has consumed more oil than it has found for the past several years, including last year by a big margin, except for fracking. If it weren't for fracking oil, the shortages would be going bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, fracking's a reality, so we can't say except for fracking. But with all the oil that the frackers brought up in the last couple of years, combined with the Saudis dumping their oil, dumping their reserves to punish the Iranians and the Russians and get them into line, that's why the price of oil collapsed.
Yeah. Well,
and right.
Go ahead, Mo.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, that's everything I've been reading about. In terms of, I'm glad you brought up the frackers because I know of two. Now, these are very small companies, so they wouldn't really affect the market that now have gone bankrupt. It seems like a lot of these companies, though, even though the price of oil was collapsed, they also failed from a management standpoint because a lot of them drilled on debt and they didn't even hedge their oil price. So it seems like what you said, U.S. went to Saudi Arabia. Do you think in any manner it has backfired because the shell industry, the rig counts are idling, and they're just now, because they drilled off debt, they're in bad shape financially?
Well, when you say backfired, first you have to understand this came from the State Department. The State Department doesn't really know much about economics or finance or what's happening in the world. They just wanted to punish Iran, get Iran to come around to their point of view. So from that point of view, it didn't backfire on them. It did have an effect, an economic effect. Yes, there are a lot of people in America, especially, who are now suffering badly. If they knew about it in the State Department, they don't really care. Now they're having to pay attention because there are enough senators who are starting to complain, and enough other people to understand, oh, well, this does have consequences. But it also makes the price of oil go down for U.S. drivers, which everybody likes for a while anyway. So it is not backfired in the sense that some people might mean, because America's gotten what it wants. The Iranians are now being more and more compliant. The Russians are listening. They're not more compliant, but they're listening closer because they have to. But the new negotiations with Iran seem to be somewhat successful now, which is one reason I think we'll probably see a bottom in the price of oil sometime this year. And yet, has it backfired? It backfired to the extent that some people in America, the frackers especially, are suffering. But also from Saudi Arabia's point of view, that's good. It's slowing down the development of fracking. Again, it's not ending it. It's slowing it down. I mean, not many people are going to buy junk bonds from frackers anymore. As you point out, many of these guys ran out, borrowed a lot of money at high interest rates, and are now suffering because of what happened. So the Saudis think that's good. That's not a backfire. Certainly the people who are going bankrupt think it's a backfire. But in the end, it's just slowing the development of fracking. It's not ruining it or ending it.
In terms of investing in the oil market, the oil stock is as cheap as it was, I say, in 2009 when the oil price collapsed from 140 and all the way down. And for people out there that's looking for yield, I think the oil stocks are a good play right now. I mean, even a big cap oil stock like Exxon or Chevron are providing decent dividend yield right now. You agree?
Well, there's nothing to agree or disagree about. Facts are they got good dividends, yes. I'm not buying oil stocks. That doesn't mean that they're not great buys. It just means that I'm not buying because I'm doing other things. But yes, there's no question. They're very nice yields in some of these oil stocks. I suspect Exxon's not going to go bankrupt, even if oil goes to 20. I suspect that Exxon will continue to pay dividends even if oil goes to 20. So for people who know what they're doing, there are probably great opportunities now in some of these oil stocks with dividends.
And one last question before we let you go. In today's news, the government has passed a net neutrality, which gives them the authority to start regulating their internet. I want to get your thoughts on that and the impact that will have on the internet.
Well, I don't know. I have to confess I haven't really paid attention. I started today. In fact, I said, well, maybe I better sit around and figure out what's going on here. My first impression always is if the government thinks it's a good thing, it's probably not a good thing for most of us. It rarely is when the government gets into something. There's been an open market in the past. But I really, other than that, I don't really know what's going on. I know that the Internet has been wonderful for all of us. The more it's opened and developed, the better it has been for all of us. But whether this is a good thing or not, I don't know. I'm very suspicious that Obama's keen on it, just because most things he's been keen on have been turned out to be wrong or a disaster. But other than that, I don't really know.
And I agree with you there. So, John, you have any more questions before we let Jim go?
Not really. He answered all of them. I was just going to say, with this net neutrality, hopefully next time we have him on, it won't be regulated and taken out. Government mandated type question. So,
well, that's part of the risk. You know, it's like anything else. When the government's there, they think they're smarter than the rest of us, and so they'll do it their way instead of what most of us would do.
And I agree with you there. Well, Jim, thank you for your time and your book, Street Smart. If people want to buy it, where can they go?
Oh, anywhere, online, bookstores, they can get it anywhere.
Okay, Jim, well, thank you for your time, and thank you for coming back on. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
All right. Have a nice day, Jim.